And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. We apologize for the late start today, but it was an internet issue, and we rebooted a few times, and it finally came back online. So it was nothing that we could really have any control over, other than it was an internet issue. So sorry about that, and I'll go my half hour, which has been 40 minutes lately, but I don't know enough to stop talking. We have basically the same announcements. We have no special services coming up. We have the collection for Thanksgiving, and we have been getting quite a bit in already. And again, there are 3 ways that you can give for Thanksgiving, and that is actually to bring some canned goods or things that we usually collect, such as stuffing and olives and those things, into the church itself. You can contact myself, Bob, or my brother, and we will pick it up from you, or you can send in a donation, and if you do that, please mark it for Thanksgiving so that we'll know how much money we have to spend. And the post office box for the church is 50314, and it's People's Christian Church, Post Office Box 50314, New Bedford 02745. So please feel free, if you don't want to go out and get the canned goods yourself or whatever, just send in a donation. And we will end up buying what we need closer to the time. And as usual, the church donates the turkeys. And if you know of a family in particular that you know yourself that needs a donation for Thanksgiving, let us know, and we'll set aside a meal for them. And we'll make arrangements with you to take care of that. So just let us know. We are still also collecting for treasures. So again, if you have your change in one of these little boxes, and these go for solar-powered audio Bibles, and we will be sending a check to, it's called World Mission, towards the end of the year, and they get the audio Bibles all set in the language of the area they're sending it. So that is also something that if you have it and you want us to collect it at your home, because you do have a bunch of change, probably the bank would love to have your change, because according to them there's a coin shortage. So if you do have a bunch of coinage and you want it taken care of, just let us know, and we'll gladly pick that up also. And I believe that's it for announcements. Again, we don't really have any special services coming up other than our annual Thanksgiving service on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock on the day of Thanksgiving. So that pretty much is about it for announcements. So we're continuing on in biblical health, and today's topic or chapter, I believe there's 5 chapters in this, 5 or 6 chapters in this little pamphlet that I'm using, and we're on chapter 4. We've talked about, health, what you need to do for your health. You should be moving, you should be breathing, and breathing, of course, is really important, but during the day you should try to remember to take deep breaths at whatever time you can do it while you're still in bed in the morning to get yourself energized a little. You might want to try to do it until we establish a pattern of doing something. We sort of forget to do it, and oftentimes we can establish our patterns by doing them at certain times, like teeth brushing. You don't forget to brush your teeth because you do it at certain times of the day. So when you're trying to establish a good habit, and there are such things as good habits, try to do it at the same time all the time. So you might be taking your deep breaths before you get up in the morning, or right before you go to bed, or maybe before you say your prayers, or before or after meals, and just take in a few very deep breaths in which your stomach actually extends when you take your breath in, and then it's important to let it all out too. I mean, really feel like you've deflated everything. So you're moving, you're eating right, you're taking your deep breaths. Sleeping is another thing. You should be getting at least 7 to 8 or more hours a night sleep. And if you don't, you need to find a way to take care of that. And there are some things you can do. And if you don't know what to do, I can give you some hints, but you really do need to get your sleep. That's also important for a healthy body. And remember, one of the reasons why I'm doing this series is because We should be living an abundant life, and our abundant life means that we're ready and able to be disciples of Jesus, which we are called to do, and we can't do that unless we're healthy. So this chapter, chapter 4, is entitled Defeating Infectious Disease. And so again, this is something that we're really concerned about right now. And our scripture reading is from Leviticus chapter 11. And I'm going to be reading verses 32 through 40. So this is Leviticus 11, 32 through 40. And upon whatsoever any of them, when they are dead, doth fall, it shall be unclean, whether it be any vessel of wood, or raiment, or skin, or sack, whatsoever vessel it be, where any work is done, it must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the even, so it shall be cleansed. And every earthen vessel, whereunto any of them falleth, whatsoever is in it shall be unclean, and ye shall break it. Of all meat which may be eaten, that on which such water cometh shall be unclean, and all drink that may be drunk in every such vessel shall be unclean. And everything whereupon any part of their carcass falleth shall be unclean, whether it be oven or ranges for pots, they shall be broken down, for they are unclean, and shall be unclean unto you. Nevertheless, a fountain or pit, wherein there is plenty of water, shall be clean, but that which toucheth their carcass shall be unclean. And if any part of their carcass fall upon any sowing seed, which is to be sown, it shall be clean. But if any water be put upon the seed, and any part of their carcass fall thereon, it shall be unclean unto you. And if any beast of which ye may eat die, he that toucheth the carcass thereof shall be unclean until the even. And he that eateth of the carcass of it shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until the even. He also that beareth the carcass of it shall wash his clothes, and be unclean until the even. And may God add his blessing to this reading from his holy word. And that was a little bit confusing, but I will explain it a little as we go on. And it's something that God told the children of Israel way back then, and we know about it now. So we'll go into that in a few minutes. Perceptive world leaders in government and medicine are beginning to realize that money, more money, medicines, research, and legislation will not win the battle against disease. And we've heard a lot about that. We need legislation. We need this. We need that. We need to force you to do this. And we're seeing that that really doesn't work. Health systems in many nations are deteriorating under the strain of burgeoning populations and limited financial resources. Our population is getting older. We're, some of us living older, and so, those are the people you see at the doctors all the time. New outbreaks such as COVID-19 pandemic severely test healthcare systems, and we've seen this happen as nations struggle to respond. And I think our healthcare systems weren't hurt so much here because we kind of learned about it ahead of time. But in cases like Italy, where they were hit first with the virus, their country was really in trouble because they had no room in their hospitals for the number of people. Although we were prepared for large amounts of people, I know we had several buildings in the city that were open, we really never had to use them because we got ahead of it, even though a lot of people in news and government would say we didn't. But we really did. A former Director General of the World Health Organization acknowledged years ago that the goal of, and this is a quote, health for all remains elusive. And it's true, there is really not good health for all. And perhaps it is time to ask, why in the 21st century are we still struggling against disease? And I really have alluded to that a lot in saying it's because we have a sick care system, not a well care system, not a health care system. We don't go to the doctor, we don't do what we're supposed to do, and we still don't do it even after we're told, until we're sick with something. And then we decide to make a lifestyle change, or we decide to take some sort of medicine, which then causes a side effect, which then leads us to take more medicine. And so it's this domino effect of medications. And so we're looking, again, at our healthcare system, which is not health. It is sickness. We have powerful tools, and they're provided by God that we could make great inroads in the world if we followed God's laws, but we know that this is not popular right now. If God said it, it's got to be wrong, right? In the early 1900s, infectious diseases were the leading causes of suffering and death in America and Europe. And it changed because we had improved sanitation, along with some medical developments, which I am not totally against medicine altogether. I'm just against it when there are other things you can do in its place. And so when we had these medical advances and also sanitation advances, it certainly did put a kibosh on a lot of the things that were plaguing the world in the 19th century and 20th century, early 20th century. Outside the developed world, however, and I think this oftentimes is ignored unless somebody is putting an ad on TV and then they kind of try and tug at your heartstrings. But outside the developed world, there are staggering and sobering pictures of where infectious disease, mostly brought on by poverty, ravage astonishing numbers of people. There are certainly preventable and curable diseases out there, and these are things that we really don't have a lot of in our country, although it is increasing for various reasons. Things like malaria, diarrhea, and you think diarrhea is a horrible illness, especially for children when they don't have clean water and so forth to take care of them. Tuberculosis, respiratory disease, these kill more than 10 million people in less developed countries every year. So we're talking large amounts of people. And of course, children are disproportionately affected. This is really a mind-boggling number when you look at it. More than 400,000 people die of malaria each year. And this is not something that we have in our country, including in that 400,000, 300,000 children under the age of 5. And this is mostly in the sub-Saharan Africa region of the world. It is estimated that 3.2 billion people, or about 40% of the world's population, are at risk of contracting and dying of malaria. That's a large amount of people. In developing countries, diarrhea, it's preventable and it's treatable, just like malaria, is another leading cause of death and disability in children. More than 10 million people contract tuberculosis each year, causing nearly 2 million fatalities annually. And in fact, by some estimates, about 1/3 of the world's population has latent TB, meaning they are affected with the bacteria, but they're not ill. And I would say the United States had more or less eradicated TB, but it has been on the rise in the last few years, so we have to be careful. In tropical and subtropical parts of the world, some 2.5 billion people are at risk from mosquito-borne dengue fever. And I know one of the times that we went to Mexico on vacation, there was a risk for getting dengue fever. You just had to be very careful when you're not going out at night and so forth like that to make sure that you weren't bit by a mosquito that carried the fever. More than 50 million cases occur each year. And again, mostly this is in the tropics. We also know that HIV/AIDS is rapidly becoming the greatest threat to health, although we have made great strides in that area. But it is in our country, but in underdeveloped countries, not so much, especially in Africa and Asia. Since its emergence, it has claimed more than 35 million lives. And today, nearly 37 million people are HIV positive, and about 2 million new cases are reported each year. In developing countries, snail fever, and I really had never heard of this before, and it's a big long word that begins with an S and it has an asis on the end that I'm not going to try and pronounce. It affects some 207 million people. It's an intestinal worm, which is disgusting. More than 190 million people in poor rural areas are at risk for bacterial trachoma, and it's a leading cause of visual impairment, so it can cause you to go blind. There's also something called a river blindness, and again, it's a word I'm not going to pronounce because I will say it wrong. And 18 million people are affected annually. And then the one that caught my eye here was because you hear about it in the Bible, but we sort of don't hear about it now, is leprosy. You know, that was a big thing in biblical times, leprosy. And we think nobody gets leprosy now, but untrue. Leprosy still disables between 1 and 2 million people every year. And again, it's from the underdeveloped countries. These are truly astronomical numbers of human beings who suffer from the curse of infectious diseases. And to make matters worse, in recent years, the heavy disease burden in developing countries has been compounded by another sobering development. As the citizens of these nations increasingly adopt the behaviors and dietary practices of the more developed nations, they are seeing increases in heart disease, cancer, and other pathologies that are prevalent in much of the developed world. So as they get the kind of the luxuries, I guess they would consider them, that we have, such as packaged foods and the like, you know, McDonald's in every corner. I might probably be taken off Facebook if I say that, but anyway, you know, they're eating differently, so they're seeing not only these diseases, but also the things that plague us, such as heart disease and cancer. And tragically, the heaviest burden of infectious and chronic diseases falls on the bottom billion, who essentially live on no money. Many countries in these poorest and least developed regions are burdened with crushing debt, crumbling infrastructure. Their governments are corrupt. They are unable to deal with these horrendous problems, and so these people continue to suffer disproportionately under the global curse of disease. A British colonial physician once wrote, "The great mass of Africa has carried a more grievous burden of disease than any other region of the world, and the present inhabitants of tropical Africa host a wider variety of human parasites than any other people." It is estimated that in some regions of tropical Africa, 60 to 90% of the population is infected with multiple parasites. And these, of course, wreak havoc on your body. So what do we do? To reduce and eliminate these agonizing burdens of disease, we have to understand and actually go at the true cause of the problem. You just can't, again, just, you know, drop some medicine and expect things to change when you don't change other things. For many of the health professionals, the only solution is, again, to pour in some money, throw some medicine at them, and help them maybe alleviate suffering. I think sometimes we give as individuals and as countries to, you know, feel better about ourselves. Well, you know, we gave $1 million to this country to help their children, but really it's just a Band-Aid and it's not solving the problem. We're not solving any of the problems. We're just putting Band-Aids on them. The problem, it's poverty, it's crowding, it's unsanitary living conditions, lack of clean water, failure to properly dispose of human waste and garbage, and lack of protection for disease-bearing insects. Things that we take for granted, such as windows and screens on our windows. There are populations that don't have that. We have repellents. We have ways to get rid of these insects. People living in poverty do not have access to these health-promoting resources. I know it was quite a few years ago. I can't remember exactly because time seems to go by fast, and when I think it's 5 years, it's really 10. But maybe 5 to 10 years ago, the church did a collection, and we sent money for a well, because there are places in the world that they don't have clean water, and this is a real problem, especially with disease. And so we sent money, and they built a well. And when you do that, it affects an entire area, not just a few people. And so we have, you know, this well where they can now get clean water instead of either traveling miles and miles to get it or using water that is not clean at all. We know that ignorance plays a crucial role because they don't quite understand what it is that's making them sick. Rachel and I went to Guatemala one year as a sort of a missionary trip. She worked in the hospital and I worked in a daycare. And in the hospital, we were told that their sanitary conditions were not like ours, but we could not say anything about it because it would be insulting to them. And we were not there to insult them, we were there to help them. And Rachel said one of the first things they did was they just cleaned the tables that they sat on or the scales that they stood on. And we brought our own stuff with us because they didn't have the stuff to clean with. And she said it was black, like this is in the hospital. And I was in a daycare, and they would line up the kids for lunch, and I'm talking, babies up through maybe 5 or 6 years old. They would line up the kids for lunch, and they would feed them with the same spoon, and then wipe them with the same cloth, and wipe their nose with the same cloth. I mean, they didn't have things like Kleenex and paper towels. We live in a throwaway society here. They use cloths, but they use the same cloth all day for everybody. And so, you could see where it was pure ignorance on their part, like not understanding that, okay, if, John got a cold, then guess what? Everybody's now going to have a cold because you wipe John's nose with the same rag that you wipe their faces with after they ate their lunch. So I saw firsthand how this really does exist in the world, and we just sort of take things for granted here that, everybody lives the same way we do. They don't. So it definitely is ignorance. They don't recognize, oftentimes, depending on the area they're from, they don't recognize the true causes of disease, like things like bacteria and virus and mosquitoes and flies. Sometimes it's blamed on evil spirits. If a kid misbehaves, then they're probably sick because they have evil spirits in them. And we also know that countless millions do not realize or want to acknowledge that sexual activity and injecting street drugs can also transmit many diseases. There are many places in the world where people will swim, bathe, wash clothes, drink water from the same stream or lake and water holes that are contaminated by animal and human waste. But that may be the only water they have available to them. So they use it. And of course, they probably don't clean it first or boil it first. It's just used. And then the consumption of animals and other organisms that transmit disease is also a factor in the spread of serious illness. Excuse me. Traveling to and from disease-ridden areas and coming into close contact with sick people and their personal items also facilitates the spread of infectious disease. Motivation is a vital factor in promoting health and preventing disease. Many know, and we should know this by now, that hands should be washed carefully, especially after going to the bathroom. And I found this quite amusing with this new virus that we're so concerned about, that they're telling us to wash our hands. I'm hoping that before this, you were washing your hands. This should not be something new to you. You should have been washing your hands the whole time. And if you weren't, shame on you. If you're preparing food, you should always wash your hands beforehand. If you come from outside, you should come in and wash your hands. So in other countries, though, this means totally changing their behavior. And it may not even be possible to do so if they don't have what they need to change it. So, how do we eliminate disease and the consequences of poverty without money? Because throwing more money at it doesn't work. How do you overcome ignorance? How do you motivate people to think and act differently? This is really not what doctors do. They just really kind of look at you and say, this is what a few tests here and there, this is what's wrong with you, here's some medication. Health planners should be involved with this in each country. Governments should be, but again, a lot of governments, especially in these areas, are corrupt. So if, they're going to just take care of themselves as opposed to the people. And so the people that should be taking care of this don't. So accomplishing these tasks without simply throwing money at the problem really does require us to rethink our approach on this. Education, obviously, must play a major role in banishing ignorance. But how can we do this? Now, I was only in Guatemala for a week. I wasn't going to go in and change. First of all, I didn't speak the language, so they wouldn't have known what I was saying. But second of all, in a week's time, I'm not going to go in and change what they've been doing right along. You would have to be in an area for a long time and educate in a way they would understand on what to change. So what's the answer? Well, believe it or not, religious leaders occupy an ideal position for eliminating ignorance and promoting behaviors that can defeat disease. In many countries, religious leaders have weekly contact with large numbers of people, usually all ages and all age groups. They promote values in our personal behavior, and many were already paid by a private organization, and many of them selflessly give of themselves. And we see that as our missionaries going into parts of the world. And really their job, their role in this is not just to preach the gospel message, but it's to help the populations that they're dealing with. Again, simple things like mosquito nets and wells being built would save a lot of people. But the major problem is that most religious leaders do not fully recognize the powerful potential of their position. And they haven't been really prepared for it either. At going in as a missionary, you're going in to spread the message. You're not really going in to change a lifestyle. But sometimes that's necessary. They really don't look at it as part of their job. But remember, we're teaching biblical principles here from the Bible. And we can see that when we obey God's commands concerning health, clean and unclean animals, choosing not to eat animals that were not designed for human consumption. If you're teaching it from the Bible, then you are following your missionary work that you're going to do. Biblical admonitions also tell us to avoid contact with animals that have died or with whatever has touched them. And that was what we read about in Leviticus. I told you that those verses seemed a little confusing, but it was talking about dead animals that you might find that just died naturally. You have to be careful about contaminating other things with them. And what did they tell you to do in those verses? If you touch them, what were you to do? Wash your clothes and wash your hands. Make sure you were clean. And it also told you to wait till even. So they were giving it some time for the bacteria or the virus to die naturally on its own. So it was a combination of keeping yourself clean and then waiting for the bacteria to die. These biblical regulations, they're consistent with sound microbiological techniques and are important techniques in fighting diseases. It was the priest's job in the Old Testament during the days of the children of Israel to teach and explain these principles, and they were to designate as unclean those who had contagious diseases. And what were they looking for? Things like skin rashes, such as leprosy, measles, smallpox, and scarlet fever. And when they saw these things, what did they do? They isolated others to prevent the spread of disease. They did not take the well population and isolate them. They took the sick population and isolated them. And this is found in Leviticus 13, if you want to look there. These biblical guidelines are the basis of medically sound quarantine procedures that have been used for centuries. This is social distancing, the term we've been kind of, thrown at constantly. But it's a powerful way to stop the spread of disease because biblical health principles of separating oneself from disease is effective. Again, quarantining the sick. The Bible guidelines include avoiding contact with personal items of sick people, which can transmit germs, and this is found in Leviticus 13. Contaminated items were washed or burned, which we know will destroy microorganisms. Again, this was from back in the days of the Bible, not now. They knew then. These were God's laws. Biblical health instructions even apply to the dwelling. A house with mold or fungal growth was quarantined until the affected material was scraped off, replaced, and covered in new plaster. And if a house could not be cleaned, it was demolished. They knew that mold and fungus were bad for your health back in biblical times, and they took care of it. The instructions here in Leviticus 14 would go a long way to improving the lives of 25 million people in Latin America who are at risk for Chagas, C-H-A-G-A-S, disease, which is caused by the bite of the kissing bug that lives in the cracks and crevices of impoverished dwellings. One duty of the Levitical priest was to promote health and prevent disease by functioning as both a building inspector and public health educator. So they looked at homes. The Bible also acknowledges that body fluids can transmit disease in Leviticus 15. That's the chapter you'd like to read on that. Contact with human waste materials, nasal discharges, tears, saliva, or soiled towels, like they used in Guatemala, can spread infectious disease. And we see that it is important that you wash your hands, you wash your clothes, and you remain isolated from people until evening as a precaution against spreading disease, Leviticus 15:11. And these were not ceremonial laws, they were laws that you needed to keep the population safe. One of the most practical and powerful biblical admonitions states that human waste should be buried away from your habitation. Of course, in our country, we have it taken out of our homes. And this is found in Deuteronomy 23. This prevents waste material from coming in contact with people, flies, and other organisms. Because remember, even if you don't come in contact with it, if a fly or a mosquito or something comes in contact with it, and then they come in contact with you, you're still getting the disease here. Wearing shoes and not using human waste as fertilizer are also important preventative measures. And many diseases such as diarrhea, dysentery, hookworm, roundworm, cholera, hepatitis, trachoma, typhoid results from contact with human waste. Sanitary disposal of human waste and access to clean water are two of the most important ways to prevent disease. And God told Israel's religious leaders to promote these instructions that would protect the health of the populace. But tragically, modern religious leaders have failed to grasp the importance of the opportunity to provide biblical instruction that could prevent the spread of disease around the world. The Bible has the answer for all of it, and we just have to make sure we're following it. It even said if you put something in a porous pot that you can't clean, to just destroy the pot. You need to be careful what you use. We know that the plastic that was developed miraculously, it was this miraculous thing was developed. We now know that it's not good for us, that it carries a lot of chemicals in it that can make us sick. So it's a good idea to get rid of all your plastic products and just use glass because that's something that works. And so all of these things the Bible has told us about. If it's ceramic, wood that something gets into and you can't clean it properly, don't use it. Get rid of it because it will carry diseases. The Bible has the answer. And that has the answer for everything, not just about our health. So I'm going to close today. We'll finish this chapter next week. And we have at least a few more weeks on this topic, and I hope that you're enjoying it, and I hope that those of you that need to are paying attention and making changes in your lifestyle, even if they're little. Any little change will help, and as you do it gradually, you'll see yourself improving. I was just talking with someone the other day, and I would say a year ago, I could not get off the couch holding something in my hands. I would have to put things down. I could have nothing in my hands, and I would have to push myself up off the couch with my arms. I now can actually stand up without holding things, and it's from a lifestyle change. And if I can do it, anybody can, believe me. So it can be done, and I don't care how old you are. I'm not a spring chicken. It's not, I'm not in my 20s anymore. I may look like it, but I'm not in my, Bob's over here saying, yes, you're not a spring chicken. So, if I can do it at my age, any of you can do it. And if you're younger and you're watching this and you do have a lifestyle that you know is not beneficial to your health, start now. Don't wait until you have these ailments that the rest of us have, and then have to do something about it. So again, we'll finish this up next week, and I hope that you're enjoying this lesson as much as I have. So before we close, we'll have a moment of prayer. Continue to remember those that are on the prayer list. Again, I'm not mentioning them because I don't know if they want the whole world to know. So we pretty much know who needs prayer. It's every one of us. So you can remember each one of us on in the church, and I know we have friends and so forth that need praying for also. We had a special birthday this week in our church. Sylvia and her twin Gloria turned 90, so happy birthday to them. So we're very fortunate to have a few people in our church that are over 90 or over. So again, all of us need praying for. So let's look to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you again today for this opportunity of meeting together, albeit there's only a few of us personally. But we also know that those that are listening by way of technology can hear your word and still get the blessing, even though they're not here, because we know that your blessings are abundant and they go so far, they're immeasurable. And we thank you that you have given us so many blessings. Every week on the Happy Bible Hour, Heavenly Father, you know that I hope that you recognize the blessings and share them with someone else. So help us to do that. Help us to share our blessings with someone else, whether it's financially or with our time or with a message or whatever it is that we have been blessed with. Help us to share it with others. And when we do that, we will be showing the love that you have given us, that you want us to share. You have admonished us to make sure that we love our neighbors. So help us, because sometimes it is difficult because we're busy, we're thinking about ourselves instead of others, and help us to get in that mindset. As always, I ask special blessings on those that are sick, those that mourn, those with financial difficulties. I ask for blessings on our country. We know that as the election comes closer, that things will probably get crazier and crazier, so we ask for blessings on our governments, local and national. Protection for our president and his family. Protection for our service personnel throughout the world. Keep them safe from harm, and blessings on their families, and also for protection and blessings on our first responders and volunteers and all those that deal with the public. May they do their jobs to the best of their ability, and please provide them with patience and wisdom and bring them home safely. Again, we thank you for your many blessings, and we give you praise and thanks in your Son's name. Amen. God is good all the time.